Hey everybody, welcome to Bura. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about what I would do differently if I were to start learning to code today. All right, welcome back. So I've been coding for a real long time. In fact, the first time I ever made a website, I was probably maybe like 11 or 12 years old. Now, of course, that doesn't sound too impressive now because, well, let's face it, like 2-year-olds make websites. I guess they do. But for the most part, in the 90s, it was a little bit more unusual to have this happening. So I've been coding for a really long time. And believe it or not, I actually went to university to learn to code with a lot of summer camps when I was about 12, 13 years old. Now, this is of course with time when coding was not cool, but I did it anyway. Now, fast forward way later into the recession, and I needed to learn to code again to make an Xbox 360 game, and I made that, and then my career took off after that. Now, there's been a lot of time since when I started to learn to code. I made a bunch of different projects here, and then I even had a career as an instructor, making tons of different courses here, and I've also made a ton of iOS games as well. So I've been coding for a real long time, and that is not what you're experiencing right now if you want to learn to code today, or if you really want to dive in and get that career quickly. Now, what I'm going to show you in this video is the top tips and tricks to get coding and get profitable within a few months here. Now, of course, you can't just learn to code on Sunday and get a 6-figure job on Monday. That's just not how this works here. And I always like to say that careers are more or less like a wheel and not a destination. You constantly have to be learning things. In fact, I've had to do this again and again and again, and I'm still doing this today. And the reason why is that technology changes here. Now, of course, believe it or not, some of the things I learned back in 1996 actually do apply today. For example, HTML is the same, or mostly the same, as it was back then as it is today. So I can pull up a text editor, write some HTML, and guess what? It is going to be mostly the same here. Now, of course, there's a lot of other things that are different here. Of course, there's mobile frameworks, game frameworks, but you know what? There's a few things that you can do that are quote unquote timeless in terms of tech. So what would I do differently if I were to learn to code today? Well, what I would do differently is I would just pick a language that you're interested in and go with it. And I would just go with whatever it is you're interested in. And there are a few areas that are a little bit more profitable than others, and I'm going to explain that in a second here. So you can always go the web development road. Web development is still really good here. Now, if I were to pick a tech stack with web development, I would make sure that you learn JavaScript and of course React, as well as Node.js, and some kind of database. Now, the database doesn't really matter, but you can pick one of those 3 things, and I think that's really good here. In fact, with what I'm doing at one of my companies is that is the exact tech stack that we're using here. And React is really good at making software as a service here. Now, the second language I have for you is Python. Now, Python is really useful, and there's a lot of really cool stuff you're doing with machine learning. Now, if you're one of the more analytical types of programmers, and if you're one of the more people that like doing a little bit of math, well, then guess what? Python is probably for you here. Now, machine learning is essentially math on steroids, but if you don't like math and you want to do other things with Python, you can also do that as well. Python is a very easy language to learn, and it's very, very useful. So if you like Python, go with that. Now, the next languages I have are kind of game programming languages, and I would say that you would probably want to learn C++ for this. Now, believe it or not, back in the 90s, I actually took C++ courses, and a lot of the stuff that I learned there can still be applied today. Now, of course, not all of it because the language has changed over a long period of time, but for the most part, you can actually use some of the code that I was learning back in the 90s today, and I think that's really interesting. And if you really want to be a game programmer, I would learn C++. A lot of the engines out there have some kind of C++ component. Now, if you like C++, it is kind of the branch to other C languages like C# here. So if you want to use Unity, Unity has C#, which is absolutely amazing. But if you learn C++ first, C# is going to be a breeze here. Now, the thing about game programming is that whether or not you're in an economic boom or bust, people are always going to be playing games. It's one of the few areas in tech where there's a ton of demand, and that demand is not fabricated by kind of money printing or anything like that. So if you like games, I highly recommend learning C++. That's one of the areas that is really good and will always be in demand. And last but certainly not least, which is a little bit odd and you might not think it's true, but believe it or not, if you learn Swift or mobile programming languages, they are still relevant today. Now, of course, the app world has changed a lot in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, it was all about making an app and putting it on the App Store. Nowadays, mobile programming is more about trying to get a big job at a big company. And if that's the kind of thing that you want to do, there is always a need for mobile developers, specifically Apple developers. So if you really like Apple, I highly recommend just going into Xcode and learning Swift and making a ton of apps in Xcode. And I'm going to talk about why you should make a ton of projects in just a second here. But for the most part, if you really want to just get a job somewhere, mobile programming is really good because there's a lot of demand and a lot of people don't think that you can actually get a good job at that anymore. That couldn't be further from the truth because all of these big companies require mobile apps, and these mobile apps are actually a lot more tricky to program than you would. And you can actually get a good job here. And a lot of people don't talk about this, but if you really like mobile and Apple, then I highly recommend just learning Xcode and Swift. So these are some of the areas that make a lot of money with coding. But if something that you like is not on the list, then you should just go and learn that here. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of legacy systems out there that require programmers that know some of these other more obscure languages. And believe it or not, it actually can be very hard to find here. In fact, there's a lot of government agencies that have really, really old programming languages, and everybody's retiring from them, and they have nobody to actually fill those jobs here. So you want to pick the coding languages that inspires you to learn as much as you possibly can. And whatever that isn't the wrong choice. That's the one you should pick. So let's talk a little bit about the game plan here. So let's say you picked web development. Now, what do you do? Now, here's what I say to literally everybody who wants to learn to code. I would just start spending as much as your free time in coding tutorials as possible. And the first place you want to go is YouTube. You can just simply go onto YouTube, watch a bunch of tutorials, and then go from there here. Now, what you really want to do is you want to track how long you are actually learning, and you want to do as much focused learning as possible. It is possible to start getting profitable within 100 hours of education. This is why coding is such a good career move, because it is possible to do that. And I am going to show you how you can possibly do in about 100, maybe 200 hours of education here. Now, of course, this is focused work, and if there is one tip that I would have is that you want to focus on learning here. You want to turn off all of your devices. You do not want to listen to music. You want to do 100% focus where the whole thing that you're doing is learning how to code here. Now, if you're hyper-focused, then you'll start to learn a lot more here. So what I would recommend that you do is that you start learning on YouTube. You type in beginner JavaScript tutorials, beginner HTML tutorials, how to build a website. And if you want to do a 20-minute lesson once a day, every day, then that's really good. You want to start doing that because you want to eventually do an hour a day. And if you can do an hour a day for 100 days, you'll almost be ready if you pick the right road. So when you first start out, you want to just start to just learn whatever it is, right? If you just pick a beginner JavaScript tutorial, you just want to pick a tutorial and you want to just go through that tutorial, okay? And for the first 10 hours, you're just kind of doing whatever it is, right? It's not really necessarily focused. You're just kind of getting in there and getting your hands dirty. You want to start typing as much as you can, and you want to just essentially just do whatever you want for the first 10 hours. And what you also want to do is you also want to save as much code as you possibly can, right? You want to save your code because you want to look at your progress and you definitely want to come back to it. So in these first 10 hours, just do whatever you want here. Now, once you've gone through 10 hours, and you want to time this here, you want to time how much you've actually been learning here. Now, if those 10 hours take 10 days, that's great. Now, you could actually do this in a weekend. You could do 5 hours a day. And if you do that, that's great. That's kind of a bigger step later on. But for the most part, if you can spend 5 hours of focused work in 2 days, good for you. But most people aren't like that, and especially I'm not like that as well, especially now that I have, well, kids and whatnot. But for the most part, if you can do like an hour a day for 10 days, that's really good. And it's, again, focused work. Now, if you do this, believe it or not, and you at the end of the hour, you still want to do more, then do more, right? If you can do 2 hours, that's great here. Personally, my attention span drops off at about the 90-minute to 2 hour mark, and I can't really do more than that here. Now, some people can focus more, some people can't, but for the most part, 90 minutes is really the optimal session here. Now, what I also like to do is I also like to do 40 minutes and then do a 10-minute break here, and that's also good too. So if you can do kind of 2 40-minute sessions, that's also not bad here. Your brain does need time to rest, which I'll talk about later. So after the 10 hours, this is when you want to start building practical projects here. And here's the key that nobody talks about, is that you want to build as many practical projects, whether they're finished or not, as much as possible and as quickly as possible. So if I have two people going through this kind of step here, and one person builds 20 websites and another person builds 2, the person who builds 20 websites is gonna be better off here. The more you do that process, the better. So let's say you want to build a website here. So you wanna look up a tutorial, build a website, and you want to just essentially do that here. Now, again, what you wanna do as soon as you're done that website is build 2 or 3 more that are just maybe 90% the same. And if you do that, you'll start to reinforce the things that you just learned in that. And there you go, you have 4 different websites, and even if they're the same here, and a lot of people might not realize that that's good for you, but if you start to build one website and you build 3 more websites that are 90% the same, you are actually on the path to success here. It's way better to do that than to just do one major website here. Now, eventually you will have to make a website where you polish it up, but that comes later here. So once you do that, you can look up a few similar tutorials here and do that process again. You want to do the same thing, just a little bit different here, and you want to be playing around with the code. The key with the tutorial is not to just look at the tutorial, but to analyze how it works and then play around with it. The playing around with things is really important. What you really want to do is focus and then play around. And sometimes when I'm learning something new, I'll spend 2 hours just tinkering with something. And that sounds really ridiculous, but you actually learn quite a lot by tinkering here. Now, once you go through that process for maybe 20 or 30 hours, you want to start kind of looking at more advanced tutorials here. And you essentially want to repeat this process here. So for 20 or 30 hours, you want to do kind of something very similar. And if it doesn't look like after the end of maybe 40 hours of work that you're getting anywhere, this is the kind of the hump that you have to get over. If you get over that hump of just kind of building a bunch of projects here, after that hump, you start to kind of build bigger projects and kind of more polished projects here. And even if you keep these bigger projects kind of smaller, but more polished, then that is a really good thing for you to do. Now, the whole point of the way I like to learn something is to have a portfolio here, because as a business person, I only look at people's portfolios, and other people do too. You need to be able to perform. When you're a coder, it's kind of like being a basketball star. Now, basketball stars can obviously perform or play, and then they can also practice as well, right? And you want to think of it just like that here. You have your practice where you kind of practice your code, you have your portfolio, and then it's game time, and that's your actual job here. And you kind of have to constantly repeat that process here. But by now, you should be about the 70 or 80 hour mark here. Now, at this 80 hour mark, you want to build one really good project that you want to put on your resume here. And what I would recommend you do is for the web development one, but you can do this for pretty much anything here, is you want to do something that's really flashy and has a ton of features here, okay? And you want to make sure that it's really polished, and once it's really polished, you want to make sure that it has a ton of features. And what I mean by that is, let's say you want to make a small software as a service or SaaS here. So if you make a software as a service website, you can have a ton of different features in that website here with payment gateways, etc. You want to have a bunch of different features that you can put in your resume that you say you know how to do with a ton of APIs, etc. here. Now, if you want to do Python, maybe it might be a machine learning library. If it's a game, obviously you want to make a small game, maybe even release it on Steam. That would be really good here. And if it's a mobile road that you're going here, then obviously you should put something on the App Store here. And you should have something publishable by the end of the 100 hours here. Now, believe it or not, if you go through this 100-hour steps, just like I'm talking about here, then you will actually be able to probably find some freelancing work here. And if not, you'll probably be able to start applying for jobs. And you do want to start applying for jobs at this point in time, if that's your goal. If that's your goal to start applying for jobs, you want to make sure that you are applying for small companies and just to see what happens here. And if you feel completely scared to go through that interview and completely not ready, then that's a good thing, because the more interviews you go through, then guess what? The better you'll get it at. Now, this is a very common theme for what I'm talking about here. The more you do, the better you get. And it's just that simple, right? So the more interviews you do, the better you are at getting interviews. The more projects you build, the better you are at building projects. The more you code, the better you are at coding. It's very, very simple. Now, it's very difficult to do this here, but if you can do 100 hours of focused work in the way that I've been talking about here, then guess what? You'll probably be able to find at least something, right? And if you don't, then guess what? You can just do it again here. Now, for all the people that have gone to boot camps and whatnot, I always say that you should always be kind of making more projects here. And I would recommend making one project a week. Now, remember, if you're going through the web development portal, you should make a software as a service, and I would make something very similar every week just so that you understand how that all works here. Now, I did mention boot camps here. Now, if you really want to go to a boot camp, it's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, if you do want to go to a boot camp, it's probably better that you spend 100 hours before you actually get to the boot camp, because that way you can maximize what's in the boot camp here. Now, the number one reason why you want to go to the boot camp is to get the connections here. The best thing about boot camps is they have feelers for all the different people and companies in the industry looking for that kind of work here. And if you're really good, you spent the 100 hours and you've already built a project here, you will absolutely breeze through that boot camp here. And I know it's kind of expensive, but if you can breeze through that boot camp and you basically will be able to be the top of your class, then you'll absolutely be able to find a job better here. Now, if you can do that, then that's great here. Now, you don't even have to go to the boot camp, but a lot of people do. Now, boot camps weren't around when I really wanted to relearn to code, and if they were, I really would have gone to one. But boot camps are actually pretty good. Now, you have to, of course, do your research here, and if you pick the top boot camp that is cost effective, I think that's a really good thing. Again, it's all about connections here. Now, this brings me to my last point. You have to be very good to work with, and your soft skills have to be paramount here. So many programmers have terrible soft skills, and if you can A, be a good programmer, B, be good to work with, and C, just have great soft skills, then guess what? You're going to get hired. Now, not only that, you're probably going to get a promotion over everybody else. So these are kind of the things that I recommend you do. So let's recap this whole video here. If you want to really learn to code and you want to get a job at, let's say, 100 or 200 hours of work, of focused work, then it's actually not as hard as it sounds. You spend the first 10 hours just kind of getting your hands dirty. After that, you start to build a few projects and iterate on those projects. After that, you start to build some more polished projects, and finally, you build one big polished project that you can use as your portfolio here. Now, of course, you can use all the other little projects in your portfolio as well, but if you build one big project with a ton of different features, then guess what? Then you're probably going to get hired here. Now, these things can be just released as a small business here, or they can be kind of a game or app that you release on a game store or an app store. And this is really good, because if you go through that publishing step, fewer people can actually push that publish button, and it's really difficult to do. And if all that doesn't work, then I highly recommend going to a boot camp here. And this is going to take between 100 and 200 hours of focused work here, and you can do that within a few months. And I say that if you can do this and you get a job, then that's great. All right, so that concludes this video. I want to know your thoughts down below. Have you gotten a programming job? How quickly did it happen here? What would you do differently if you've already learned to code? And if you're already learning to code, then I want to know your progress down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.